my curious cats, and welcome back to another episode of the Say Psychology podcast, the podcast for all the info on psychology's most questionable history. I'm your host, Leslie Lopez, PhD student and psychology nerd. Ooh, you guys, we got a good one today. Well, a good episode. Not a good person, because let's be real, none of the people we talk about on here are ever really good people. But I've been wanting to do this episode since the beginning of season 3 because it's one of my favorite cases. But I was like, nah, let me leave the best for last, which kind of brings me to my next point. It is the end of season 3 officially. Okay, not only is that insane to think about because it feels like it's been longer, but that's only because I've taken so many breaks in between. Again, I'm so sorry. But when you think about it, that's 30 whole episodes. How is that? What? 30 episodes, you guys. I get so emotional, mostly because I just love doing everything, the whole shebang of a podcast. May not seem like it just because I get absent sometimes, but I promise you, I love the whole experience. Talking to myself, researching, learning, just the whole thing. I really do enjoy it. Please believe it. I mean, I was looking at the analytics the other day, and part of the analytics section of a podcast, it shows you the different countries that people are listening to / watching from. You guys, as of today, the Say Psychology podcast has been seen / watched in the following countries: United States, Canada, Australia, the UK, Brazil, Belgium, Albania, South Africa, España, Bolivia, India, Slovakia, Mexico, and Italia. That's fucking huge. I'm just a little person. I'm literally just a girl. And when I started, I didn't think I'd even reach an audience outside of my hometown, let alone globally. But thankful doesn't begin to express the gratitude. Thank you for all the support, the patience, and just know that I make every single one of these episodes with nothing but love. All right, back to today's episode. We're going to be learning about one of the most infamous doctors / questionable serial killer to date, a man known as Dr. Death. None other than Dr. Jack Kevorkian, the man behind the concept of assisted suicide. So, if you're a little bit insane in the membrane like me, get cozy tozy, and let's jump into it. Okay, before I go any further, it's no secret that I am a strong liberal, and I am also true to my Christian faith. I've made it very clear, I've been very adamant about it through my entire podcast history. If you've been with me from the very start, you know that I do not shy away from voicing many of my opinions, which include saying things like free Palestine, fuck ICE, and everything in between, which honestly all coexists with the Christian faith, unlike one specific political party's point of view. I'm not here to get political though. Unlike some of them, those with real Christian faith, those that have actually read the Bible, those who have actually know what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ and God, I know, okay? What I'm trying to get at, essentially, is that my liberal mind believes that we should have the right to free will and our bodies are our choice. However, my Christian heart believes that only God has the power to take life, which means no one should die at the intentional hand of another human being. Therefore, this episode is a tough one for me for personal reasons, and it may be for others too. So I guess kind of take this as a warning as well. Also, wait, side note, I don't want anyone in my comments coming at me thinking I'm against abortion. A fetus is not a human body. It is a clump of cells. Healthcare is abortion. Abortion is healthcare. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Okay, let's settle in. Born Murad Jack Kevorkian in the town of Pontiac, Michigan, May 26, 1928. A Gemini. Never trust a Gemini. Jack Kevorkian was born to Armenian immigrants who immigrated here from Turkey. Jack was the middle child of an older and a younger sister. So not only was he a middle child, he was also the only boy in the family, And he was born a Gemini. Ooh, he did not have it good. He did not have it great from the very beginning. Growing up, Jack was known for his uber intelligence. From a very young age, he started teaching himself multiple languages, including German, Russian, and Japanese. He went on to graduate high school a year early and then earned his bachelor's from the University of Michigan and then a medical degree in anatomical and clinical pathology with research on blood transfusion, also from the University of Michigan Medical School. So you could say he was a pretty smart cookie. We love an educated person, especially with an immigrant background. It was during his medical school internship that he truly found his calling. One day, while making his medical school rounds, he saw a woman practically on her deathbed. Her skin was pale as a ghost. Her stomach was distended in. The woman was basically slowly dying from liver cancer and very obviously in pain. He would later go on to describe her as, quote, looking like she was pleading for death with her eyes, but we couldn't give it to her, unquote. From that moment on, Dr. Jack Kevorkian's mindset forever changed. This experience so early in his career made him start to question the conventional practices of keeping a patient alive at all cost. He continued his research, and then in an article he published in 1959, he proposed that a prisoner on death row should be allowed to voluntarily submit to medical experimentation and a complete anesthesia as a form of execution in lieu of conventional death row methods such as lethal injections. Essentially, he was suggesting that since death row individuals are already expected to die, this could be the perfect opportunity to advance medicine research in the field of death. But the public feared that a program like this could expose prisoners to even more exploitation than they already faced. So much so that the University of Michigan, the school where he was completing his residency, fired and expelled him. Can you imagine the school where you are completing your lifelong dream at expelling and firing you because of a thought, because of a theory, because of an idea? But it was fine. That same year, 1959, he found another residency at Michigan Pontiac General Hospital. I'm telling you, smart cookie, that and connections. However, new school, same Kevorkian. You see, at the time, blood donors were something in short supply and transfusions were vital in hospitals. So Kevorkian suggested that there was an untapped resource there. But again, the general public just couldn't stomach his proposal. The idea of a dead person's blood flowing through a living patient tapped into something primal, if you will. Nonetheless, Kevorkian kept his research up and brought with him a new daring proposition. Well, actually, it was more of an old proposition, but with a new spin to it. That year, 1984, he had seen an increase in prisoner executions. It reminded him of his earlier proposition from decades ago for inmates facing capital punishment, offering them the choice to be euthanized under anesthesia so their bodies could be used for medical experiments. But now Kevorkian had other plans and ideas. Forget their blood, and their organs could be harvested for transplants. While somewhat morbid, the concept was starting to jump off, believe it or not. In 1984, Kevorkian had a newfound interest in the medical field, assisted death. An uptick in executions inspired a new iteration of his decades-old idea. Rather than experimenting on inmates for after they were put under anesthesia to die, Kevorkian wanted to harvest their organs, a decades-old idea, except this time it was being better received by the public. Other countries had started experimenting with physician-assisted death, and to fully investigate the full extent of it, Kevorkian headed to the Netherlands to study it. The practice of physician-assisted death was only offered in some places and only for those suffering with terminal illness. Kevorkian shadowed these doctors to learn their techniques and how they navigated the choppy legal waters of assisted death. We have to remember that yes, it was starting to be accepted by the public, but even today, it's something that's greatly argued. In 1988, Jack moved back to Detroit, where he opened his own private practice, advertising his work in bioethics. aka the study of death. Don't worry though, he was more of a counselor to those with terminal illnesses, not quite assisting these patients in anything deathly just yet. He will get there, and we will get there though. Through these counseling sessions, he noticed that many of his patients were depressed as fuck. So, if anything, he would be providing them a service. No? Don't you think? Not only that, but it'd be of great research for the medical community. A win-win situation, if you will. I mean, these patients may not have been inmates legally sentenced to death, but they did wish to die, and they were, in a way, inmates of their own body, their own illnesses. You see what I mean, or what he meant? Kevorkian saw no reason that they shouldn't be granted that wish, but sadly, it was against the law, and doctors were forbidden from practicing in a patient's death. The year was 1989. There was no law against assisted suicide. There was, however, legal repercussions for murder. I mean, duh. So he, Kevorkian, had to find the loophole between the fine line of assisted suicide and murder. This loophole was somewhat found in the notion that although a doctor should never play God, he must also not let a patient suffer. Kevorkian was focused on the latter. He set out to build a machine where all he would have to do is press a button and a painless death would be set in motion. Over a few months, Kevorkian tinkered in his little square-footed apartment and finally finished his little doohickey. The machine was nothing special at first. It was a small, simple, box-like thing where 3 IV bags could be placed with valves wired to an electrical timer and was then triggered by a button that could be pushed by the patient themselves. That last part is very important because by the patient being the one to press the button, Kevorkian just provided the machine. The actual death was administered by the patient when they were the ones to press the button. Once the machine's button was pressed, the device released a series of drugs into the patient's veins one at a time, killing them painlessly in line with its function. Kevorkian originally named the machine the Thanatron, which translated to death machine in Greek. Now that Kevorkian had his death machine built, all he needed was a patient. So in 1989, he took his invention to the press by trying to advertise it in medical journals. As you could imagine, it wasn't exactly seen with the kindest of eyes. I mean, even today, have y'all seen that thing about the suicide pod? Officially known as the sarcopod, it's a euthanasia device that consists of a capsule that's mounted on a stand that contains a canister of liquid nitrogen to die by suicide through inert gas asphyxiation. It was invented by Philip Nischke in 2017, a euthanasia advocate. Listen, I'm not the best person to ask for opinions on assisted suicide. Okay, I made that very clear at the beginning of the episode. As many of you know, I hold a strong Christian faith, and I truly don't believe that anyone, not even ourselves, have the right to take someone's life, not even our own life. I don't even agree with capital punishment. Do I also think no one should have to suffer in a completely miserable life? Yes. See why I'm the worst person to ask about this? But anyways, back to Kevorkian. His death machine received a lot of criticism, but as you know, all publicity is good publicity. He was thoroughly convinced that the right patient would see his logic, agree, and come to him looking for an angel of mercy. He simply insisted that people had a right to die, plain and simple. Although he wasn't just handing out assisted suicide all willy-nilly either, at the end of the day, he was a respected doctor with standards and rules that he had to adhere to legally. He developed a strict ethical requirement to decide which patients he would assist. Each potential patient would be approved on a case-by-case basis. For starters, the patients needed to be suffering from an irreversible physical ailment. They had to have exhausted all the available medical interventions that there were at the time. The patient had to fully understand and agree that they needed to be in control of their own fate at all times. And lastly, but most importantly, they had to want to die. In 1989, at the ripe age of 61, mind you, Kevorkian finally met the patient that would change his career trajectory and his life forever. 54-year-old Janet Atkins had read in a news article of Dr. Kevorkian's death machine and was intrigued that it was offering a painless and dignified way to die. Janet had recently been diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. Doctors had told her that she probably had a few good years left, if that. She feared it progressing and her health growing worse. So when she stumbled on the article about Kevorkian, she felt like death was the only way to avoid a future life of suffering. You'd think Kevorkian would have jumped at the opportunity at first, but he actually hesitated. Because Janet wasn't suffering from physical diseases, like the physical ailments of Alzheimer's that impaired her to live her daily life just yet. Stick with me for a sec, okay? Because like Alzheimer's is very much can be a physical ailments. But the thing was, although it was an irreversible condition, it was also a neurological illness. Meaning there was potential for the court to see and question her mental capacity to make such a decision, and therefore she didn't have the ability or mental capability to consent to assisted suicide. Were you following me? After about a year of deliberation with Janet, Kevorkian knew that she had done her research, done all the treatments, and knew that she knew there was no way she would progress for the better. So Kevorkian eventually agreed to help her. Remember how I mentioned his number one rule was that the patient wanted to die? Well, that was Janet, all right. She showed Kevorkian she was serious about her decision when he reached out to dozens of places asking for permission to perform this act. No one agreed to help him. Shocker. Janet was getting angsty as her health continued to decline, so much so that she told Kevorkian that she didn't care where it was done as long as it was done. Now, if that doesn't show you how much she wanted it, I don't think anything does. In June of 1990, Janet met up with Dr. Kevorkian at a park in Michigan. He had set up his death machine in the back of his van, which he had made to be as comfortable as possible, with some upholsteries, curtains, all that, to avoid onlookers from the outside in. First assisted suicide. Kind of nervous. And nervous he was. He was so nervous that while Kevorkian was preparing the machine, he spilled the vial of one of the 3 drugs and had to leave Janet in the van while he drove 45 minutes to and from his house to get a fresh batch. Imagine being Janet, okay? Like the whole time I'd be sitting there like, this is a sign. Eventually, he finished setting up and continued with the procedure. I guess it wasn't a sign. After he had successfully hooked all the IVs on her, all she had to do was press the button. And press the button she did. A few seconds later, the machine showed a flat line, which meant Janet was gone. Now, obviously, he wasn't going to just leave her there in the back of his van in the middle of a park in Michigan. There are tasks for the family to come and get her. The family was well aware of what was going on. Janet's decision, they were in the loop of everything. There were still legal and correct steps that needed to be taken in order to bury her, though. Dr. Kevorkian promptly called the authorities. If anyone came to attack the situation, he had recently videotaped a 45-minute interview with Janet and her husband that proved her authorization, need, and consent to the procedure. He also had signed legal documents that essentially stated the same thing. 6 months after Janet's death, Dr. Kevorkian was hit with murder charges, though. The court was citing a 1920 Michigan Supreme Court decision about a husband who was convicted of helping end his wife's life. I feel like this sort of case pops up every so years. Do y'all remember Michelle Carter? And in 2016, she was convicted of involuntarily manslaughter of her boyfriend, Conrad Roy. For some reason, I remember this case so vividly in the back of my mind, but essentially, in 2014, She was 17 at the time. She knew that her boyfriend Conrad had been suffering with depression for a very long time, and through text messages, she encouraged him to go forward with his suicide. The boyfriend had turned his car engine on inside a closed garage and was texting her through the whole ordeal. He got out of the car briefly because he was scared, and she texted him to get back in, telling him that he can do this, kind of like cheering him on. In the end, she was convicted. She's out now, and a movie was made about the case. Very different from Kevorkian, but I don't know, like I said, I feel like assisted death cases just keep popping up every so years. But back to Kevorkian. Janet's family testified in court for Kevorkian, stating that Janet wanted this. Her suicide note was read out loud for the court, and her interview with Kevorkian was played for the jury. In the end, the trial only lasted about 10 days, and the judge ultimately threw out the charges because, as it turned out, Dr. Kevorkian had not violated a single statute. The state of Michigan had no law on the books that made it illegal to help others in their decision to die. I don't know about today. I'm in no way familiar with Michigan law, but nonetheless, it was a victory for Dr. Jack Kevorkian. Victory didn't last too long though. Prosecution came for Dr. Kevorkian's ass, but he was not scared. They claimed that Jack Kevorkian might influence others to also experiment with assisted suicide. They claimed that it could one day lead to mass involuntary euthanasia reminiscent, get this, of Nazi doctors who participated in the Holocaust. It was agreed by the prosecution that physician-assisted suicide would bring some serious societal risks. Some felt that if permitted to end lives, doctors may think more about the bottom line than the health of their patients. Because let's look at it this way. It certainly cannot be a cheap procedure. Therefore, it may benefit them, the doctors, to focus on the end monetary goal rather than playing the long game. But the thing about Dr. Kevorkian is that it was never about the money for him. He simply disagreed with the prosecution and believed they just didn't understand his objectives. Ultimately, the judge barred Dr. Kevorkian from using his machine to assist any more patients in their deaths. Kevorkian thought it smart to fly under the radar for a bit. He spent the better part of 1991 meeting with other patients in secret. Since the court had confiscated his death machine shortly after Janet's death, Kevorkian considered other ways for his patients to end their lives. This guy had a vision, okay? And he was not going to let anyone, not even the legal system, stand in his way. And you know what? If you're going to respect someone for something, let it be for this. The concept that Kevorkian settled on would potentially allow him to take a hands-off approach for the moment and avoid any more legal battles. This new concept required that the patient place masks over their face and hit a button, at which point a canister of carbon monoxide was released into their lungs. On October 2nd, 1991, Dr. Kevorkian used his new method on 2 new patients who had been suffering with life-debilitating diseases for a long time and had decided life was not worth living. After both were officially dead, he did the same thing as he did with Janet and rightfully called the authorities. They were not having it. They had no idea Kevorkian had got behind their backs to invent a new device to keep administering assisted suicides. Thus far, it had only been the 3 lives, but I guess it was more about the principle. The court immediately stripped him of his medical license. I'll be honest, there are a lot of legal proceedings that took place during this time, and I'm no legal expert in any way whatsoever. There's a reason I didn't go into the legal system. Kush, my guy up in the UK, if you're listening, I could really use your help over here. But ultimately, the defense argued that suicide, assisted or not, is a human right. A sin, but a right nonetheless. An already dying patient should be allowed to choose their own fate. Legal proceedings continued, and so did Dr. Kevorkian. By the end of 1995, he had helped dozens of patients end their lives. The state virtually had no case, so he was able to continue his work. But in the spring of 1996, they tried to charge him with common law Again, more legal proceedings, more legal jargon. I'm not going to go into it. Eventually, he was acquitted thanks to the testimonies of the families and all his past patients on his behalf. Sorry, the families of his past patients, not the past patients themselves, they're dead. Okay, in 1998, he had helped almost 150 people end their lives. Kevorkian began to play with the fine line between assisted suicide and euthanasia, though. With euthanasia, he was the one administering the entire process. Assisted suicide had the patient do the final button pushing. In the late 1990s, he administered and videotaped his first and only euthanasia case. The tape was aired on 60 Minutes and again caught the attention of the court. This, however, ended him in prison under a second-degree murder charge. He spent only 6 years in prison, got out in the early 2000s, did interviews of his past work with great journalists such as Anderson Cooper, and then died in 2011 of a blood clot. Well, my curious cats, thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. It was quite a trip, many mixed opinions. What's y'all opinion on physician-assisted suicide or euthanasia? Just because suicide is a right doesn't mean it should be encouraged. I don't know, that's just my opinion though. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, and Apple Podcast. In any event that you are feeling that suicide is the only answer, please know that there is help. Okay, I've been in certain shoes. I know what it's like. There is help, there is hope. As always, citations will be in the description if you want to check those out. Stay blessed, stay safe, and stay psyched. I love you.